After coming back from the competition, the transfer student was sitting in my seat. When she saw me, her eyes turned red. "I've been sitting here ever since I transferred here." My childhood sweetheart frowned. "Dara. I'm just helping her with her lessons. You can come back in a few days." I walked away in silence. However, my childhood sweetheart regretted it. He blocked my way on the only road I had to take. "I'll change the seat back. Can I just be your desk mate?" During the morning class, the teacher walked in just as the bell rang. I was the only one standing in the class, and everyone looked at me at the same time. The teacher frowned. "What's going on over there?" Someone quickly said, "Dara's seat has been taken by the transfer student. She has no place to sit." "Teacher." As soon as these words were spoken, the girl's eyes turned red, and her voice trembled as she said, "Teacher. I've been sitting here since I transferred here." Lance beside her glanced at her and frowned. "Dara. I'm helping her with her lessons. The head teacher also knows about it. You can just come back in a few days." After a pause, he added another sentence. "There's no need to bully others just because you'd just come back." My heart skipped a beat. I really didn't understand how I, who hadn't said a word, had bullied anyone. The transfer student bit her lip and lowered her head, as if she didn't dare to look at me. The teacher tapped the blackboard several times with the pointer, making a sound. "Take your seats and let's start the class." There was only an empty desk in the last row of the class. I took a deep breath and walked to the back. But then I heard the girl's low, trembling voice. "Or else I'll go and sit at the back." Lance's voice was soothing. "No need for you to go. Don't be afraid. I won't let anyone bully you." When I sat down in my seat, I happened to see the girl's slightly flushed side face. Her eyes were full of admiration, and her voice was cheerful. Thank you, Lance." The teacher started lecturing on the platform. My mobile phone vibrated. It was a message from Lance. "When did you come back? Why didn't you tell me in advance? Didn't we agree that I would pick you up?" He asked 3 questions in a row. I looked up and caught my phone face down. Lance turned around to look and frowned. When the class was over, the girl trotted out. Lance came up to me. "You didn't reply to my message. Are you unhappy? Are you jealous?" He explained. "I didn't know you would come back suddenly. But don't target Lyra. I was the one who asked her to sit in that seat. Just for a few days. When she catches up with the progress, you can come back." I looked up. "No need." Lance was slightly stunned. Lyra trotted back through the back door and handed me a Coke with some ice floating in it. "Dara. I'm sorry for taking your seat." She looked at me, her eyes full of sincerity. Lance's eyes were filled with relief. I stared at the bottle of Coke and didn't take it for a long time. Yesterday when I got off the plane, I had severe menstrual cramps. Since I didn't see Lance, I called him. I was sweating coldly. "Lance. Where are you? I'm on my period and my stomach hurts so much. Why haven't I found you yet?" There was silence on the phone for a moment, and a cautious female voice came out. "Lance is helping me get food. Can he call you back later?" I even forgot the pain at that time and froze on the spot. I had sent Lance the flight schedule long ago. He didn't come. He was busy helping others get food. I took a deep breath and came back to my senses from the memory. In front of me, Lyra's hand started to tremble as if she couldn't hold it steady. With tears in her eyes, she said, Dara. I'm just here to apologize." Lance frowned. Unable to bear it, he took the bottle of ice water from her hand and slammed it down in front of me with a bang. "Dara. Enough is enough." Lyra, with her red nose, pulled him back. "Don't. Lance. It was me who took Vera's seat after I transferred here." She shook her head, looking pitiful. It seemed that I was being aggressive in contrast. Lance looked at me. His gaze gradually turned cold. He pulled Lyra back to their seats and comforted her as if he was backing her up. "When you chose the seat, Dara wasn't here. You don't owe her anything. Don't apologize anymore. She won't affect our relationship." Lyra looked up at him. The sunlight shone in, and her small face seemed to be gilded with gold. "Lance. Really?" Lance softened his expression. He reached out and rubbed her head, his voice extremely gentle. Really? Lance and I were typical childhood sweethearts. I was born 15 days earlier than him. Our two families joked and made an arranged betrothal for us when we were children. When he was young, his parents went to his grandparents' house to start a business and didn't come back until primary school. But most of the children nearby were girls. He didn't know how to play rubber and skipping or shuttlecock kicking. He pestered me. Dara, you're going to marry me in the future. You have to play with me. Coincidentally, my mother had also told me to take care of Lance a bit at that time. So I had to take him with me and change the shuttlecock kicking game into playing house. I played the mother. And he insisted on playing the father. He told everyone that we had an arranged betrothal. He almost wrote, "I'm Dara's best friend," on his face. Since primary school, he had squeezed in like that, always saying that we had an arranged betrothal, and successfully pushed everyone else away. He got to the position closest to me. Before the competition, he had agreed with me that I must tell him when I came back. He would definitely pick me up, regardless of wind or rain. But the message I sent was like a stone dropped into the sea. What blocked him wasn't wind or rain. It was a meal that he had to help get in the cafeteria. It was really unpleasant. During the lunch break, the cafeteria was full. When it was my turn, there was only the last serving of boiled fish left. Auntie, I want the boiled fish. I want that boiled fish. At the same time, the person at the next window said the same thing as me. Our eyes met. Lance was slightly stunned. The aunt inside turned around and asked the kitchen staff. The big ladle made a sound when it was placed beside the plate. There's only one left. And there's no more ingredients in the kitchen. Who should I give it to? Lance pursed his lips. Dara. I promised Lyra that I would treat her to dinner today. Can you let me have it? I'll treat you tomorrow. I pretended not to hear. Auntie. I asked for it first. Okay. The aunt agreed and scooped out the last serving with one scoop. Her hand didn't shake, and it landed on my plate. I swiped my card and walked back with the plate. Someone rushed over here recklessly. Lance. I've reserved a seat for us. She seemed to be blind to me. Her chest bumped into my plate in an instant. And with a crash, the soup and everything spilled all over the floor. She froze and hurriedly apologized. Dara. I'm sorry. I didn't see you. The last serving of boiled fish. I didn't get to eat it after all. Lance heard the noise and rushed over. He took a look at the scene and subconsciously stood in front of Lyra. Are you okay? I didn't know who he was asking. Then I saw Lyra take out a tissue from her body. She directly squatted in front of me to wipe the soup splashed on me. Apologizing as she wiped. I'm sorry. Dara. I didn't mean it. Lance frowned. He forcefully pulled her up. Lyra. There's no need to do this. She looked at Lance timidly. But Dara seems very angry. I was so angry that I laughed instead. Lyra. You've read too many novels and like to act, right? Lyra opened her mouth slightly in shock. Enough. Lance pulled her behind him. It's just a dish. I'll compensate you. That's enough. I slowly lifted my shoe to show him. The shoes cost 500 yuan. Pay me back. Lyra's face instantly turned pale. That's so expensive. Dara. I'll go and buy you wet wipes and definitely help you wipe it clean. With tears in her eyes, she quickly trotted out. Lance looked at me, his expression full of disappointment. Dara. Is it necessary? After the evening class, Lance, who came out later, caught up with my steps. Why didn't you wait for me? I looked up at him. I've already stopped where I should. He chuckled. You're really taking it seriously. He walked a few more steps and ran in front of me. Dara. I'm just taking care of her a little. Don't you think she's a lot like me when I first came back to the city to study? There were no familiar people, and everyone excluded me. I'm just helping her out. It's also a kind deed. I walked past him. He chased after me and promised. I won't help her for long. When she gets used to it, you can move back, and we'll still be desk mates. After a pause, my tone was flat. No need. You can do your kind deed. Lance was stunned. He looked at me a few times. Dara, you're angry. This time it wasn't a question. He looked a bit guilty. Is it because I helped Lyra get food? Or because I didn't pick you up the day you sent me the flight ticket? Lyra got her period. She couldn't even find the supermarket in the new school. So I went to buy things for her. Lance's cheeks turned red. So I didn't see your message that day. I just saw the flight ticket you sent when I checked the chat history. I'm sorry for missing it and not picking you up. After a short silence, I stopped. Lance caught up, his eyes full of joy. Don't be angry. Vera, I said. Lance. Yes? Who you're close to is your business. You don't need to explain it to me. It was really boring. He froze on the spot, looking a bit confused. We're both girls. Can't you even understand this? That day, I shook him off and walked away alone. On the morning of the second day, I didn't wait for him as usual. Lance was a few minutes late. As soon as he entered the door, he looked at my seat, as if he was blaming me for not waiting for him. I looked away and opened the exercise book in my hand. The head teacher pushed the door open. The classroom instantly became quiet. The head teacher looked very happy and introduced the new member on the platform. Orion. I had heard of this name before. I raised my head. My gaze happened to meet his eyes. He was openly looking me up and down. Our eyes crossed. Suddenly, he raised the corners of his mouth. After the head teacher finished speaking, Orion can choose a seat now. In the whole class, only the seat next to me was vacant at present. Teacher. Lance suddenly raised his hand. His voice strangely tense. Let the new classmates adhere with me. Lyra was shocked and her eyes turned red pitifully. Vera. Then I. Lance's eyebrows were furrowed as if they could pinch a mosquito to death. Orion spoke unhurriedly. Teacher. I want to be Vera's desk mate. He named me specifically. Lance's face immediately darkened. Orion walked towards me. He pulled out the chair and sat down. Vera. Nice to see you again. Orion was my biggest rival in the competition. He knew me. And I knew him too. He was the top student on the honor roll of the neighboring one middle school and had always held that position firmly. I couldn't figure out his purpose. At that time, the mobile phone in the desk vibrated. It was a message from Lance. Vera. Did Orion transfer to this school just for you? I glanced at it. I didn't reply. During the lunch break when we were having lunch, Orion followed me. I chose what to eat. And he chose the same. Finally, filled Lance's eye. He sat down opposite me with his plate. I didn't understand. Why did you transfer here? Just to have dinner with me? Orion paused. He looked at me as if he was watching a joke. Slowly, he picked up a piece of fish and put it in his mouth. The boiled fish in your school is really delicious. With a bang, someone put their plate down heavily on the table. Lance had an unhappy look on his face and sat down beside Orion. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lyra standing there, looking lost and holding her plate. Lance. There are still empty tables over there. Lance's face was ugly. I'll just sit here and eat. Caring for the new classmate. Orion's chopsticks paused. He looked at Lance inexplicably. Politely and distantly. He said, thank you. But no need. I put down my chopsticks and looked in Lyra's direction. Lance's kindness is misplaced. This new classmate is not a little girl in need of care. Lance was at a loss for words. He stared at me unpredictably for quite a while. Lyra bit her lip and, as if afraid to get close, called him again. Lance stood up abruptly, took Lyra's hand and said, let's go. We won't eat here. I lowered my eyes. But then I saw a pair of chopsticks pick up the last piece of fish in my plate and gracefully put it into the mouth. Hey! I exclaimed. Orion narrowed his eyes. Thanks for the treat from the new classmate. Coming out of the cafeteria, Lance was waiting at the door. When I came out, he quickly pulled me aside. Dara? Are you trying to annoy me? Is it necessary for you to have a meal with the transfer student? I was puzzled. What's wrong with having a meal together? Don't you also have meals with transfer students all day long? Lyra was mentioned by me. She hid behind Lance in panic, pulling at his school uniform. I'm just not familiar with anyone. Lance takes care of me. Lance was stunned. It seemed that he didn't expect that I would bring up Lyra. He looked back at the frightened Lyra and then looked at me disapprovingly. How can Lyra be the same as him? Lyra is a girl. I was angered into laughter. What does it have to do with you? Lance. Aren't you being too nosy? Before I could finish speaking, a faint voice interrupted. Excuse me. In your school, I'm only familiar with Vera. Lance's breath hitched. He gritted his teeth and looked at me. Orion took a step forward. Vera. After eating, let's talk about the problem-solving ideas. I think only the two of us have common topics when it comes to study. I was astonished, but I met Orion's gentle eyes. Instantly, hesitantly, I understood what he meant. I meekly replied, okay. Lance was furious. He jumped down from the steps and tried to stop me again. Orion, however, grabbed the school uniform on my shoulder and pulled me behind him. He faced Lance and raised his eyebrows. Anything wrong? Lance gritted his teeth. Vera, come back to the classroom with me. What about your transfer student? Won't you take care of her? Orion asked. Lance's eyes swept over there. Lyra was standing alone on the steps at the door, looking at him uneasily. He hesitated for a moment and still looked at me. Vera, Elisha. It's not that the three of us can't be together. Come with me. Orion smiled. I simply took Orion and walked in the opposite direction. Orion. Sorry. There are indeed some people with a bit of a problem in our school. I hope you don't laugh at this. Just like watching a stupid drama. The corners of his mouth lifted. It's quite interesting. On the runway of the playground, a gust of hot wind blew by. It made people feel hot at the bottom of their hearts. Suddenly, I was curious about the purpose of Orion's transfer. Logically speaking, being the top student in the grade and with the halo of competitions, no school would easily let such a genius go. Why did he suddenly transfer to my class? Stereotype, he explained in one sentence. I didn't understand. Orion frowned. Everyone thinks that once students are separated into liberal arts and science classes, the disadvantages of girls will be immediately shown. I understood what he said. When choosing science subjects, even the teachers didn't quite recommend it. They told me very tactfully that it was recommended to choose liberal arts. There are indeed some differences in the brain structures of men and women, but it will never affect the ability in mathematics, physics and chemistry. I still didn't understand. What did this have to do with his transfer? You've also seen that in competitions. The ratio of men to women is higher for men. In fact, it's completely due to the stereotype of the world and the lack of competence of girls in science subjects caused by traditional concepts. But you're different. Orion stopped walking. Your confidence in front of mathematics, physics and chemistry is the first among the girls I've seen with my own eyes so far. I'm working on an argument about differences in brain structures. I was a bit surprised. Do you mean to change the stereotype of girls in traditional concepts? Yes, Heli too. I'm working on it. I have to admit, Orion's idea made me admire him. I hated being dissuaded when it came to class division. People self-righteously told me girls are more suitable for liberal arts. I also didn't like the astonishment of others when they saw girls breaking through in competitions. I looked up at him. Orion. I'll help you. He smiled. Okay. 77 since that day. Lance unilaterally declared a cold war with me. He avoided the time when I went to and from school. Instead, he was always with Lyra. Some classmates in the class joked. Lyra, since you transferred here, Lance has even given up his first love. Before, everyone knew that Vera was the closest to him. I heard that there was even an arranged childhood marriage between them. Lyra was scared and frequently looked back at me. Lance frowned. He turned Lyra's head with one hand. It was just a joke made by the elders. After thinking for a moment, he lowered his voice. It's not like that now. There's no such relationship. Lyra looked back at me again. She hesitated to speak. Is it because of the new classmate? She bit her lip. Their relationship is really close. During the holiday a few days ago. I think to see Vera and the new classmate going to Maple Street together. Lance suddenly stood up. His face looked extremely ugly. Where did you say? Maple Street? Lyra tried to pull him. Lance. Don't be excited. Maybe I was mistaken. Maple Street. It's a famous street with hotels in our area. It's extremely popular among nearby college students during holidays. Lance's eyes were burning with anger. He pushed the chair aside and rushed to me. Vera. Don't you have any shame? The classmates in the class were all startled. He was so angry that he almost pointed at my face. I just ignored you for a few days, and you couldn't bear it. Vera. You couldn't wait as soon as he came. Do you know that you are my... He met my eyes. His excited emotions gradually cooled down. I stood up and stared at him coldly. Go on. Lance was silenced. He glanced at Orion again. The corners of his eyes turning red. Vera. Did you sleep with him? He said in a hoarse voice. I want to hear it from you. I couldn't hold back the dictionary in my hand anymore, and threw it hard at his face. With a dull sound. A big bump appeared on Lance's forehead. Lyra exclaimed. She trotted over. Vera, Orakha. How could you hit someone? I looked at Lyra. My gaze was calm. Lyra, may I ask? What were you doing on Maple Street? Lyra was at a loss for words. Her face suddenly turned pale. Her lips moved. I. Then her eyes filled with tears and she shouted. Vera. How could you spread rumors about me? At that time. The man beside me had a cold voice. He dialed the phone. Hello. Police officer. I've been slandered. No one expected that Orion would really call the police. Lyra was terrified. She desperately shook Lance's arm, hinting him to help. But Lance just stared at me with red eyes. Vera. Are you fighting with me because of him? I looked back at him without flinching. Lance. What do you have to compare with him? Are you worthy of comparing with him? Lance's face changed instantly. I slapped the table. I raised my voice. Next to Maple Street is the university in our city. We can sneak in to listen to the Olympiad math courses. What's wrong with Orion and me studying subjects? Spreading dirty rumors about me? Lyra, I want to ask you. We went to the university on Maple Street. What about you? What were you doing? The atmosphere instantly became tense. Lyra's face was pale and she was on the verge of falling. I'm a new transfer student. I have no relatives here. You're spreading rumors and calling the police. Do you want to ruin me? She looked at Orion again. Her eyes were red and she looked pitiful. Orion. This matter really has nothing to do with me. Orion leaned back in his seat. He closed his eyes as if he didn't hear anything. Lance's eyes, on the contrary, flashed with joy. He quickly grabbed my wrist. Vera. I was just speaking without thinking just now. I apologize. I quickly shook off his hand. I took out a tissue and wiped the skin he had touched. I frowned. Lance. Please stay away from me in the future. He was remorseful. Vera. I was angry because I regarded you as my best friend. Don't forget that we still have an arranged childhood marriage set by our families. I said word by word. It's not like that now. There's no such relationship. I didn't look at Lance's stiff face. Because the police pushed open the classroom door. Who called the police? He did. I pointed at Orion beside me. And me. We are both contestants in this year's competitions. We were slandered. The incident that involved the police in high school was no small matter. The principal came to the school in person. He called Orion and me to the office. This incident has a very bad impact on the school. Orion smiled. Principal. If you don't agree with my calling the police, I can also file a lawsuit. Your school students have violated my right to reputation. The principal was at a loss for words. He opened his mouth several times but held back. Finally, heading to Feldland. He waved his hand and let the two of us go. Probably for anyone else. I would have been severely educated by him. Walking back to the classroom. The air in the corridor was stuffy. Before we could walk back, it started to rain. The raindrops hit the glass windows, making a crackling sound. Orion looked out of the window and suddenly spoke. This is the stereotype of human beings. I looked at him. He added. Just because of a casual guess. Dirty water was poured on us. Even the principal thought that we were making a big deal out of a small matter. I knew what he wanted to say. The stereotype he was discussing had existed since the beginning of class division in high school. Everyone said that girls were not suitable for science subjects, and could only choose liberal arts that required rote memorization. My mother, who was clearly very talented, was drowned by everyone's criticism and finally could only choose a junior college. But no one knows that my mother was my first Olympiad math teacher. The rain leaked through the not closed tightly window and fell on my face. I said, I'll work hard. He looked at me silently. I'll defeat you in the Olympiad math to prove that girls are no worse than boys. A smile appeared in his eyes. There are quite a number of female mathematicians. You don't necessarily have to defeat me. Some people say, talent determines the upper limit. And effort determines whether one can reach this upper limit. I don't agree with this. The effort made later can always break through a person's upper limit. It has nothing to do with gender. When Lance came back, he had a very complicated expression. Lyra followed behind him, wiping her tears as she walked. She sat back in her seat and simply lay on the desk and started crying. There was no sound. But her shoulders were shaking violently. My cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Lance. Dara. I was too excited just now. I apologize. I'm just too concerned about you. The other side showed that it was still being typed. I took a look and simply blocked him as a friend. Annoying. Lance, who was in the front seat, had a dark face. He threw his cell phone into the desk, making a thud sound, which startled Lyra and made her raise her head. Her little face was as white as paper. But there was no trace of tears. After the evening class, Lance still rushed out first. I didn't pay much attention. However, on the way, I saw him standing there straight, waiting. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. Dara, why are you walking so slowly? I frowned and dodged his approaching body. Lance froze on the spot. I walked forward. He sighed and trotted to catch up. Dara, are you still angry? I misunderstood you about what happened today. But I was just worried because I thought you were being deceived. I didn't respond. He quickly grabbed my hand again. You slapped me too. And my forehead still hurts now. Can we just call it even? As if he was afraid that I wouldn't listen. He spoke very quickly. I figured it out. The reason you mind Lyra is that you care about me too much. Now I've almost finished tutoring Lyra's lessons. I'll tell the head teacher tomorrow and you can move back. We'll be deskmates again. I was amused by him. Do I look like someone who's so worthless? Lance? I don't care about your seat or your friends now. Get out of the way. Don't force me to call the police. He was startled. He seemed both ashamed and angry as if someone had stepped on his foot. Why are you so addicted to calling the police? I know that I was close to Lyra before and didn't consider your feelings. Now that she's adapted, I'll ask her to move away tomorrow and only take simple care of her in the future. Can we go back to the time when we had the best relationship? No. I was provoked by his pestering. If you want to be a sentimental fool and have a fearless spirit, that's your own business. Don't get close to me. Lance. This is my last warning to you. His expression changed. I simply shook him off and walked away directly. He was furious behind me. You're so close to Orion. You're not any better. I stopped and waited for him. Lance quieted down behind me and then quickly caught up. Dara, have you figured it out? Before he could finish speaking, I gathered all my strength and slapped him hard across the face. The sound in the night was very abrupt. He covered his face, looking angry. You slapped me again? Dara, do you really think I have no temper? He kicked over the roadblock on the road. He was extremely irritable. I silently watched him going crazy. Finally, heading till Feldwand Session. I said, Lance. You make me sick. Lance's pupils shrank. Before he could say anything, I said, don't contact me anymore in the future. I turned around and didn't look at him again. The sound of him kicking the roadblock violently came from behind. He shouted, then why the hell did you slap me? Lance really didn't talk to me anymore. As if he was sulking. Instead, he treated Lyra better and better. I was busy working on number theory for the competition with Orion and didn't pay attention. One day, I received the notice of the competition results. Both Orion and I made it into the top 60. Next, we would participate in relevant training and prepare for the teen training camp. This meant that our school had to recommended students for admission at one time. The principal publicized it widely. Soon the whole school knew the names of the recommended students in Class 1. During the big break in the evening, surprisingly, there was boiled fish that was usually only available at noon. Orion and I were in the queue. Lyra was at the very front. Rarely, Lance wasn't seen beside her this time. She turned around, looking a bit embarrassed. Orion. Orion. Are you also here to eat boiled fish? I have a plate of fish with a lot of meat here. I'll give it to you. To be honest, Lyra had the typical appearance of a delicate and innocent girl. She had fair skin, and her cheeks were slightly flushed. If I were a boy, I might also have the urge to protect her. I stood in the queue and watched the fun. Suddenly, someone grabbed my arm. Orion looked at me with a very serious expression. The one with more fish. Do you want it? I was stunned. What does it have to do with me? Orion said, oh, and then turned his head to decline. Sorry. I'm allergic to fish. Eating too much might kill me. Lyra's eyes immediately turned red. I quickly moved a bit further away. Then I saw Orion approach the window. He didn't lower his voice. Please give me a plate of boiled fish with more fish. Lyra's eyes were on the verge of crying. She bit her lip, not knowing where to run with the tears about to fall. The next moment, there was an extra plate full of fish in my hand. Orion had a calm look in his eyes. Training partner. This is for you. I smiled with my eyes narrowed. Thank you for the treat. New classmate. Lance came back 5 minutes before the evening self-study. He was holding something in his hand. He was out of breath. All night. He looked at me intentionally or unintentionally. When the evening class was over, he deliberately didn't leave and waited in front of the classroom. Vera. He had a serious attitude. There was joy in his eyes and eyebrows. I'm especially happy for you. I nodded. Thank you. He was persistent. He simply took out the box in his hand and handed it to me. Tomorrow is your birthday. Here's a gift for you in advance. My eyes swept over the beautifully packaged gift box. I didn't move. He frowned. I was wrong about what happened before. But this time we're both calm. Can I talk nicely and you also respond nicely? He took a deep breath. You should have also seen that I'm keeping my distance from Lyra. This time, it's not just words. But I'm actually doing it. Vera. I sincerely want to make up with you. My previous act of kindness is over. Don't be angry anymore. Okay? The last sentence was said very softly by him. I sneered. There's one thing you've misunderstood. I've never had the thought of being angry with you. I just want to stay away from you, because in the future, we won't be in the same class anymore. Lance's face suddenly became extremely ugly. I continued to tell him. Since the moment you didn't go to the airport, we were already over. He suddenly realized. He quickly tried to grab my hand. Vera. It really wasn't my fault that time. Lyra took my phone to look at it. I didn't even have a new message reminder at all. I dodged him. Lance was anxious. How can you sentence me to death just because of such a small thing? He could never understand how a girl felt when she had menstrual cramps and was dizzy at the airport. I still remembered that day. I was found by a boy who got off the plane with me. He ran over to get me a cup of hot water. And it took me a long time to stand up again. But I only saw the back of that boy leaving. Vera. Lance called me. His voice was a bit hoarse. And his eyes were red. Tomorrow is your birthday. And my birthday is in half a month. I won't ask for anything then. Can you just give me your forgiveness? I'll move the desk back. And you can sit beside me again. I walked away for a long distance. I didn't reply to him anymore. Lance shouted behind me. This isn't the only gift for you. I'll put all the gifts on your desk tomorrow morning. Okay? I didn't respond. He didn't have the chance either. Because I had a flight ticket for tomorrow. I was going to participate in the training camp. I would have a better future. When Orion showed up at the airport, dragging his suitcase, he came towards the light. The light was so bright that I couldn't see his face clearly at all. But I could see his figure clearly. It was so familiar. When he sat beside me, he was still concentrating on reading the analysis of the question types in his hand. Then, "Levarlo sorry." Before turning off the phone, he forwarded the link to me again. "Take a look too. This solution is quite interesting." Suddenly, I asked him, "When we came back from the competition, were you the one who helped me?" He was slightly stunned. "No," I murmured. "But that cup of water seemed like it was from you." He suddenly smiled. "So you're talking about that cup of water. It was just a little effort. Can that be considered as helping?" I suddenly didn't know what to say. I couldn't help but think of when we were playing house, and Lance said to me with a smile, "Dara, I saved you again this time. Otherwise, you would have to play getting married with someone else." The announcement on the radio asked to turn off the phones. I came back to my senses. However, my phone vibrated before it was turned off. The reminder showed that a number on the blacklist was calling. There were multiple pop-up windows. I looked away. I looked at the scenery below. "Oh, Ryan." "Yes? I'll try my best to beat you." He smiled. "It depends on whether you have the ability or not." I didn't contact Lance anymore. But I still heard news about him. He insisted on telling everyone. "Vera will definitely come back after the training camp." After saying that, he moved the seat back again. Lyra cried bitterly at that time. A boy in the class couldn't bear to see it and exchanged seats with her to make it okay. Lance lost his only deskmate in the school. I heard that his already not so excellent grades dropped a few more places. Even my mother told me. Lance brought a lot of gift boxes to our home. But she didn't accept them. She just said that Vera would come home and then we could talk about it. I was smiling at that time. "Mom, heading so failed Ryan session. You did the right thing." My mother was happy. "Mom doesn't understand what happened between you two. But I remember that Lance promised firmly that he would send you home safely. So your dad and I didn't go to pick you up that day. The way you came home with a pale face that day showed that no one took care of you. Mom knows you well." She paused. "I don't contact Lance's mother much anymore either. I told her not to break off a long-term friendship because of me." My mother said. She had thought it through. If a child has a problem with their character, there must be something wrong with the parents too. So not contacting them is also a way to protect ourselves. I was amused by my mother's words. Orion passed by behind me. Still smiling. "Are you sure you can be in the top 6? My heart skipped a beat. I subconsciously hung up the phone. Speechless. "Are you trying to scare me?" Orion glanced at me. I followed his steps. "I'm sure I can do it. Let's go eat first. The pickled fish sure tastes okay." The sunlight was just right. It stretched the shadows of us running very long. I had a car accident unexpectedly when I was 3 months pregnant. Lying in the emergency room, I was sweating coldly in pain, my face pale and bluish, and I kept calling Weston, but I just couldn't get through. However, after I had a miscarriage, I accidentally saw a Moments post by Weston's first love. My boyfriend put aside all his work to watch the sunrise with me. He loves me so much. It turned out that while I was hovering on the verge of death, he was watching the sunrise with his first love. I smiled bitterly and dialed my tutor's number. "Professor Zhou, after careful consideration, I've decided to study abroad and can leave recently." On the 3rd day after my miscarriage, Weston finally came back. There was a hint of guilt on his face, but more of the satisfaction after having a good time secretly. I didn't rush up excitedly to question him why he had been missing for 3 days and didn't answer my calls. I just gave him a faint look. "Kimura, I took on a closed project in the company. Because I signed a confidentiality agreement and couldn't disclose it to anyone, I didn't reply to your messages in these 3 days. Don't be angry. I won't do it again next time, okay?" I smiled faintly. It was really an extremely clumsy excuse. What kind of project could make him unable to even return a phone call to me? Even though my heart was icy cold on the surface, I just calmly said, "Okay." Weston was stunned for a moment, a bit surprised by my reaction. In the past I should have rushed up hysterically, shouting and questioning him. Kimura, are you still angry with me? Don't be angry. I specially bought you some flowers. Weston took out a bunch of not-so-fresh roses from behind. It was so perfunctory that it was obvious he had bought them casually on the roadside. Looking at his solicitous appearance, I laughed at myself. After 10 years of marriage, don't you know that I'm allergic to pollen? What? Weston paused and slightly widened his eyes. He seemed a bit ashamed, but then showed a cold and rational expression after a moment. Sorry, Kimura. I've been working day and night these days and I'm so tired that I forgot you're allergic to pollen. This silk scarf was specially bought for you. Do you like it? I looked at the light pink silk scarf in Weston's hand. There was a famous brand on it and it was indeed quite valuable. However, my eyes gradually became red. Because this silk scarf was the one that Zarya didn't want. I had just seen it in her moments. She posted a big box full of gifts. The caption read, "My boyfriend always likes to give me things randomly. Everything else is okay, but this silk scarf is so ugly. It's better to tie it on a dog." So Weston gave me this silk scarf that Zarya discarded like a worn-out shoe and thought was only fit for a dog. Just like all the things he had given me in the past 10 years, they were all the ones that Zarya didn't want. After picking through them, it was ridiculous that I had always regarded these worthless things as treasures until I saw one moment's post after another by Zarya and finally woke up from my beautiful dream. What's the matter, Kimura? Don't you like it? I put away the silk scarf and forced a faint smile. I like it. Weston thought that I wouldn't pursue the matter anymore and heaved a sigh of relief. By the way, Kimura, you kept calling me in these 3 days. Was there anything urgent? No. I hid the icy coldness in my eyes. It was just that I had a car accident, my life was in danger and I couldn't keep the baby. In Weston's heart, how could it be more important than accompanying Zarya to watch the sunrise? Weston was about to say something when suddenly his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and immediately said, "Kimura, I need to deal with some work matters first." After saying that, he hurried back to the study. He didn't even notice my abnormally pale face, nor did he care about my health at all. Looking at the heavily closed door of the study, I no longer hesitated and wearily dialed my tutor's number. "Professor Zhou, I've already thought it over. I've decided to study abroad to further my study in art." Professor Zhou was a bit surprised by my sudden change of mind. It was just that he had suggested that I go abroad for further study countless times over the years, but I had refused him every time for Weston's sake. "Kimura, are you really sure? Once you go, it will take at least 3 to 5 years. I'm sure. Once I thought that my marriage with Weston was happy and perfect, but I didn't know that everything was just an illusion. Since I was a teenager I had liked Weston, but in Weston's eyes there was only Zarya. The two of them standing together could be described as a perfect match made in heaven. It was a pity that Weston was a poor boy while Zarya was a wealthy young lady. So they kept quarreling and breaking up. Every time Weston was heartbroken by Zarya and got drunk all night long, I was the one who accompanied him. I made hangover soup for him and took care of his emotions until he made up with Zarya and left me aside. Like this, I had been Weston's backup for 3 years. Finally Zarya went abroad and soon got a new boyfriend. That day Weston cried his eyes out. After drinking one bottle of beer after another, he asked me with red eyes, "Why did she leave? Am I really not worthy of being loved?" I hugged him tightly with heartache and said softly, "No, you still have me. Kimura will always be with Weston." That day Weston hugged me back for the first time. And then he kissed me. Perhaps under the influence of alcohol he took off my clothes. When I woke up the next day I found him sitting by the bed smoking. "Kimura, let's be together from now on. I'll forget Zarya." At that moment, I was so dizzy with the happiness of my long-cherished wish coming true that I agreed without thinking. Since then, we lived the life of an ordinary couple. We fell in love, got engaged, and got married. Although Weston wasn't very enthusiastic towards me, we had always treated each other with respect. I thought that I had married for love until Zarya suddenly added me on WeChat. Her numerous moments post stabbed my heart like needles. making me feel as if I had fallen into an ice cellar. They were all pictures of Weston and her together. After I was with Weston, their contact had never been cut off. On our wedding anniversary 3 years ago, Weston suddenly had something urgent to do. In fact, he rushed abroad to accompany Zaria to a concert. 1 year ago, when I had a fever in the middle of the night and couldn't find Weston anywhere, he said that something had happened to his brother's family. In fact, he was busy making international calls with Zaria. Half a year ago, on the day when I won a competition, the host invited Weston, who was my family member, to go on stage to give a speech, but he suddenly disappeared, leaving me alone to face numerous audiences embarrassingly. But that day, he was in a hurry to go abroad to comfort Zaria, who was in a bad mood. Over the years, Weston had accumulated a thick stack of plane tickets. It was like proof of their love. So I finally realized that this marriage had been a mistake from the very beginning. Weston had never forgotten Zaria. Until I had a car accident and a miscarriage, Weston was busy accompanying Zaria to watch the sunrise. I thought that this precarious marriage should come to an end. Weston, since you love her so much, I'll give you back to her forever. After the miscarriage, my body was already weak. Before long, I felt a wave of sleepiness hitting me. In a half-awake and half-asleep state, I heard Weston say, "Sorry, Kimura. I probably won't be able to come back tonight either. I haven't finished dealing with the matters at the company." In an instant, all my sleepiness disappeared. In the past, when he told me that he was busy with work, I wouldn't doubt him. But it was only after I saw Zaria's Moments posts that I knew how many times he had lied to me under the pretext of work. This time, it probably wasn't an exception either. But my heart was so numb that there wasn't a single ripple of emotion. "Okay, you can go." Weston was stunned. If it had been in the past, I would definitely have questioned him thoroughly for a long time. But why did I agree so easily today? He suddenly felt a bit flustered, so he kissed my cheek soothingly. "I won't be gone for long. I'll come back to accompany you soon. I know that I've neglected your feelings these days, but Kimura, we have plenty of time in the future." After saying that, he walked out of the room without looking back. I looked at his back and thought to myself, "Weston, there won't be plenty of time in the future. Because we don't have a future anymore." When I woke up the next day, the sun was already high in the sky, but Weston hadn't come back. At this time, my phone rang. It was Weston's colleague. "Sister-in-law, why didn't Weston come to the company today?" I paused for a moment. "He said last night that he had gone to the company to work overtime." As soon as I said this, there was silence on the other end of the phone for an instant. Then, as if busy covering something up, he hung up the phone in a hurry. I silently opened Zaria's Moments. Sure enough, what caught my eye was the sentence, "My boyfriend is so sweet." Last night, I said that I was afraid to be alone at home, so he specially came to sleep with me. The accompanying picture was the side face of Weston embracing Zaria. The way he looked at her was like looking at a priceless treasure. I took a deep breath and called Weston. The phone rang for a long time before it was answered. "What's the matter, Kimura?" Weston's voice was a bit hoarse. I didn't know what he was doing. "Are you coming home today?" "Weston, that's too sensitive." "No." Suddenly, I heard an extremely ambiguous and soft female voice. I froze for a moment, and then a dense feeling of nausea welled up in my heart. Weston panicked a bit and moved the phone a little further away. "I probably have to work overtime today, so I won't go back." After saying that, he hung up the phone in a hurry. I forced myself to drink several glasses of water and couldn't help but go to the bathroom and retch for a long time before I managed to suppress that nauseous feeling. After I married Weston, he seldom touched me, and I had never seen him lose control of his emotions like that. Now that I thought about it, maybe it was just because the person he was facing was me, not Zaria. That day, I tortured myself by browsing Moments. I saw Weston blowing Zaria's hair, washing her underwear, and making lunch for her. Each of these things was something that Weston had thought was too troublesome to do for me before. I also saw them go to the amusement park and kiss at the top of the Ferris wheel. It said that lovers who kiss when the Ferris wheel reaches its highest point will never be separated. I silently saved these pictures and then said in my heart, Weston, okay, I also wish you two a happy union and that you'll never be separated. When Weston finally rushed back, what he saw was me with an expressionless face, and most of the dishes on the table were already cold. He felt a bit guilty and deliberately said, Kimura, didn't I tell you not to wait for me to have dinner? You're pregnant now. You can't go hungry. After saying that, he was about to hug me. But I dodged him. Weston, you still don't know. Our baby is already gone. My mood dropped instantly. Seeing me like this, Weston somehow also felt a bit choked up in his heart. Even though I was right beside him, he felt a sense of distance that he couldn't touch me. Kimura, I'm sorry for neglecting you these days because of work. The day after tomorrow is your birthday. I swear I'll accompany you well, okay? I forced a smile. Okay. Weston heaved a sigh of relief. I soon stopped thinking too much about it. On my birthday, he seemed especially excited. He kept finding topics to talk about with me along the way, trying to make me happy. He took me to a romantic French restaurant. But just at the moment when we had finished ordering the dishes, his phone rang again. Seeing the caller ID, he subconsciously frowned tightly. Then, after a few seconds, he said to me, Kimura, I'll go out to answer a phone call. I nodded. I already had a premonition in my heart. Sure enough, after a while Weston came back with a troubled look on his face. Kimura, I'm terribly sorry. A leader from the company suddenly came for an inspection. I have to go back and entertain them. Okay. Before he could finish speaking I replied. Weston was suddenly stunned. The words he had thought up got stuck in his mouth and he didn't have time to say them. Work is important. You're also doing it for our family. I understand. Hearing me say this, Weston looked particularly relieved. He didn't hesitate anymore and couldn't wait to leave. Kimura, don't worry. I'll definitely make it up to you with a proper birthday celebration next time. There won't be a next time, Weston. I silently ate this birthday dinner by myself, just like the little girl who always celebrated her birthday alone 10 years ago. I'm an orphan with no parents. Weston was the one who accompanied me on my first birthday. At that time he said, Little Kimura, how pitiful you are. You have to celebrate your birthday alone. Fortunately you met me. From now on, with me by your side, you won't be alone anymore. Since then I've fallen head over heels in love with Weston. I regarded him as my salvation. Unfortunately, the only one who can save oneself is always oneself. Tears fell onto the cake on the plate. I took a bite. It tasted bitter and salty, not sweet at all. Weston, you lied to me. I'm still alone. Weston felt that he owed me, so he gave me a lot of gifts as compensation. But on that very day I saw that Zaria had posted another Moments having a clearance sale. My boyfriend gave me so many gifts. I asked him to take some away and sell them. I'm such a thrifty and good girlfriend. Of course the ones taken away are the ones I don't like. I laughed at myself. Then I threw all of them into the trash can. Suddenly I wanted to do something. So when Weston said again that he was going out for a dinner party, I asked him who he was going with. At first he was quite calm. But his face changed when he heard that I also wanted to go. Reluctantly he had to say, Zaria has returned to China. We old friends are thinking of holding a welcome banquet for her. It's really just to welcome her. There's no other meaning. Weston couldn't wait to explain something, but I interrupted him. Of course I know that you and Zaria are just friends. So as your wife I'm also willing to go with you to welcome her. Isn't that good? Weston couldn't tell for a moment whether I was telling the truth or not. But looking at my sincere eyes he didn't know how to refuse. Reluctantly he had to agree to take me with him. When we arrived at the destination I saw the bright and flamboyant Zaria at a glance. Weston, you're here. She gave Weston an enthusiastic hug. Then, as if she had just noticed me, she waved her hand embarrassedly. Sister Kimura, you're here too. I was just so happy just now. You won't mind, will you? I shook my head with a faint smile. No, that's good. I was afraid that you might misunderstand because of my good relationship with Weston. Zarya said with a hint of showing off. And when everyone took their seats, I realized how much Weston cared about Zarya. He knew all her preferences. Every dish he picked for her was her favorite. He took care of her like a gentleman, and there was no place for me, his legitimate wife, in his eyes. Zarya, you left Weston because you thought he was poor back then. Now that you see Weston has become successful, you're back? Suddenly someone said sarcastically. Zarya's face turned pale in an instant. Tears welled up in her eyes, looking as if she was on the verge of falling apart. I didn't come back for money. She looked as if she had suffered a great injustice, which made Weston feel extremely distressed. Enough. This banquet is Zarya's welcome banquet. Whoever talks nonsense again will get out. That person fell silent. But looking at Weston's heroic act of saving the beauty, I just felt extremely ironic. Weston had always been gentle and polite, but now he could even swear for his first love. He really loved her deeply. Just then a waiter pushed in a large bouquet of red roses. Mr. Weston, here are the 999 red roses you ordered for Miss Zarya. At that moment the atmosphere became subtle. The first one whose face changed was Weston. After all, 999 red roses symbolize passionate love. How could people not think too much about it? He tentatively looked at me, only to find that I didn't react at all. Kimura, don't misunderstand. I'm just to welcome Zarya back to China. I know. There's no need to explain. I smiled generously, which made Weston stunned and at a loss for a moment. He always felt that I was a bit too calm. So calm that, it seemed that I really didn't care. I glanced faintly at the huge bouquet of roses and then thought of the bouquet of flowers that Weston casually bought by the roadside a few days ago. One was exquisite and noble, and the other was perfunctory and sloppy. Just like Zarya and me in his heart. I once saw a handwritten letter from Weston in Zarya's moments. In the letter he said that actually he was quite glad that Zarya didn't stay with him. Because he had nothing back then and could only let Zarya live a hard life. So what about me? Did I deserve to suffer? I stayed with Weston through thick and thin when he started from scratch, but he had never even given me a carefully selected gift. All the gifts he gave me were the ones that Zarya didn't want. It seemed that in his heart I could only be Zarya's backup all the time. I was just his pastime when she wasn't around. Just then the building outside the window suddenly lit up. Huge words appeared on it and kept flashing. But when Weston saw that scene, the color drained from his face instantly. It said, Weston, Zarya, be the light for each other. I can explain. Weston grasped my wrist a bit eagerly. Zarya also exclaimed, Sister Kimura. Please don't misunderstand. Weston and I are just really good friends. But I felt a sharp pain in my heart and couldn't smile at all. They are the light for each other. Then what am I? An annoying obstacle? I thought I could be indifferent, but I found that I would still be sad. Weston isn't a romantic person, and he's even a bit shy. Once I just wanted him to hold my hand while walking, and he said, there are too many people. It doesn't look good. But he was actually willing to spend a lot of money to confess his love on the building in the busy city center for Zarya. In this love story belonging to the two of them, it seemed that I was the redundant third party. Excuse me. I picked up my bag and left, but Weston quickly caught up with me. He kept explaining to me that he had no improper thoughts about Zarya. I know. It's okay. I said calmly, blocking all of Weston's excuses in his mouth. Again it was this strange feeling of being neither close nor distant. Weston frowned tightly. Even when we got home he still felt extremely restless in his heart. He always felt that there was something he seemed to be losing his grip on. So he hugged me from behind and said affectionately, Kimura, I know I've done some things wrong recently, but you have to believe that I love you. I've been fantasizing about our future life every day, fantasizing about the birth of our child. Tell me, what's a good name for him? Hearing him mention the child, I felt another pang in my heart. Weston, our child is already gone. But you still don't know it until now. If you had cared about me even half as much as you do about Zarya, how could you have never noticed it? Before I knew it, my tears wet my eyes. Weston suddenly panicked. Kimura, it's all my fault. Don't cry. To compensate me, he even turned down work and stayed by my side all the time. This was something I couldn't even imagine before. He asked me if there was any place I wanted to go. After a pause, I said, I want to climb a mountain. You promised to make up a confession to me. Back then, after I got together with Weston, he promised me that he would give me a formal confession. He said that he would declare his love for me at the highest place in the city. But after marriage, he always used being busy with work as an excuse to put it off. I know that he didn't want to say it. He just didn't want to say it to anyone except Zaria. Now, I want to hear that belated confession before I leave. Just to fulfill a dream of Kimura at the age of 20. Weston readily agreed. He packed our luggage and drove me to the foot of the mountain. But just when we were about to set off, his phone rang. Not long after answering it, he showed a hesitant look. Soon, he said, sorry, Kimura, I can't go again, right? I interrupted him. The expression on my face was as calm as water. Weston forced himself to suppress the strange sense of uneasiness in his heart and nodded. Then he left me behind without looking back. Weston, is it really necessary for you to go? I suddenly called out to him. Weston paused for a moment, but he didn't stop walking. He seemed eager to rush to a great love appointment. Looking at his back, I suddenly felt so tired. The person who made the promise back then had already changed his heart. Only the person who easily believed it was still waiting bitterly. I climbed the mountain alone, letting the scorching sun shine on me and letting myself sweat profusely. Until I reached the top of the mountain and looked down at all the people. I shouted, Kimura, you must love yourself. Even if no one loves you, you should still love yourself. When I got home, Weston hadn't come back yet. I habitually opened Moments and found that Zaria had indeed updated it. Received the confession that my sweetheart made to the sea. Romance lasts until death. So Weston went to accompany Zaria to see the sea. He refused to accompany me to climb the mountain and fulfill our promise made when we were 20, but he was willing to tell the whole world that he loved her. I laughed at myself. Perhaps I was too tired these days. I was exhausted both physically and mentally. Just when I was going downstairs, I accidentally missed a step. Soon, I felt everything went black before my eyes and I actually rolled down the stairs. My body was instantly in pain all over. A stream of blood flowed down from my forehead. Weston? Perhaps because of years of habit, I subconsciously called the only family member I had. But after the call was connected, Weston said, Kimura, I'm in an important meeting and can't leave for the moment. We'll talk about it later if there's anything. After saying that, he quickly hung up the phone. But I had just seen Zaria's Moments. She said that Weston was accompanying her to watch a movie. I called again, and this time it was hung up directly. Huh? I laughed at myself mockingly and mustered up my last bit of strength to call 120. When I woke up again, I was already lying in the hospital, wearing the blue and white striped patient gown. The doctor said that my fall was quite serious and it would be best for me to stay in the hospital for observation for 2 days. However, when I went to pay the fees, I unexpectedly ran into Weston and Zaria in the hospital. He was carefully coaxing Zaria and patiently feeding her some medicine. Zaria, don't be afraid of the bitterness. Only by taking the medicine can your cold get better. So it was just a cold. Weston didn't care that I had fallen down the stairs, yet he was so solicitous and painstaking for Zaria's little cold. I vaguely remembered that Weston once told me that he liked strong girls. So whenever I encountered anything, I tried my best to handle it on my own. But he was coaxing Zaria so patiently. After all, it was just the difference between loving and not loving. Kimura? Finally, Weston saw me. His hand trembled and he almost knocked over the medicine bowl. Aren't you supposed to be in a meeting? I just finished the meeting. Zaria is sick, and I happened to bring her to the hospital. Why are you in the hospital? The nurse beside him told him that I had fallen down the stairs, and his brows furrowed instantly. Kimura, are you okay? Did you hurt our baby? The nurse was a bit confused and said, Are you this lady's husband? She's not pregnant. It's okay. The baby is healthy. I interrupted the nurse. I calmly told a lie. Only then did Weston breathe a sigh of relief. He glanced at the delicate and pitiful Zarya beside him and then said, "Well, if you're okay now, I'll send Zarya back first. I'll come back to take care of you after I send her off, okay?" I forced a smile and said, "Of course. Weston, you've missed the last chance to learn the truth." Weston didn't think much about it and couldn't wait to help Zarya and leave. And I waited in the ward until evening, but Weston never came back. Out of habit, I opened moments and only then did I know that he had taken Zarya to go racing. They were freely galloping in the night wind. Weston's face was full of relaxation and joy, without a trace of worry about me. I was like a numb puppet, without the slightest fluctuation in my mood. After paying the fees, I didn't stay in the hospital and went straight home. Then I threw away everything related to Weston in the past 10 years completely, cancelled all my social media accounts, and changed my contact information. Finally, I confirmed the flight time. Then I put the divorce agreement that I had prepared long ago, the backup of Zarya's moments, and the plane tickets that Weston had collected for 7 years all on the coffee table. And then I left this city. When I had safely arrived in the UK, Weston finally remembered me. He had been racing all night and was now lying in bed with a tired body, while Zarya was snuggling obediently in his arms. As the adrenaline gradually subsided, he suddenly remembered that I was still waiting for him. Thinking of my pale face again, he couldn't help saying, "Zarya, I have to go to the hospital to see Kimura tonight." Zarya snorted softly, "You promised that you belonged only to me tonight. If you really can't let Kimura go, can't you just give her a call?" After saying that, she started acting coquettish in Weston's arms again, moving her hand around Weston's sensitive parts. A flash of desire appeared in Weston's eyes and instantly he gave up the idea of visiting me. He didn't hesitate anymore and just gave me a call. But when he called me, he found that I had blocked him. This had never happened in the past 10 years. In the past I was gentle and considerate to him. Let alone blocking him, I had never even said a harsh word to him. Weston suddenly felt a strong sense of panic. He sent me a message on WeChat only to find that I had blocked him on WeChat too. And as for my other social media apps, I had directly cancelled them. At this point he could no longer stay calm. The panic that he had been forcibly ignoring burst out completely at this moment. He just felt that if he didn't do something quickly it would really be too late. So he quickly put on his clothes and rushed to the hospital. "Weston, you promised to accompany me tonight." Zarya pouted and tried to cling to him, but Weston pushed her away. "Stop making trouble. Something must have happened to Kimura, or else how could she block me?" Zarya was pushed to the ground and looked at Weston in disbelief. "You pushed me? You pushed me for Kimura?" Weston thought of how I had always been indifferent and distant when facing his closeness with Zarya in recent days, and the panic in his heart grew even stronger. He ignored Zarya and rushed to the hospital in a hurry. But the medical staff told him that I had already been discharged. He then hurried home only to see an empty room. Everything related to me was gone. On our wedding photo my figure had been torn off. The once full wardrobe was suddenly more than half empty. All the cosmetics on the dressing table had disappeared and even my pair of slippers was missing. Weston murmured in a daze, "Kimura, where have you gone?" He staggered and slumped onto the sofa and finally saw the documents on the coffee table. In an instant his face turned pale. He tremblingly picked up the photos that recorded his moments with Zarya one by one. With each photo he looked at, his face became paler. He didn't even have the courage to look at more than 5 or 6 photos. But I had printed out hundreds of them. How desperate must I have been at that time? What's more, he suddenly saw my miscarriage report. "What's this?" Weston's eyes instantly turned red and then he let out a painful wail. The child he had been looking forward to for so long was gone. And when he saw the date on the report he froze on the spot. It was the day when he went to accompany Zarya to watch the sunrise. He remembered that I had called him countless times that day. But in order not to let me disturb him and Zarya, he simply turned off his phone. It was 3 full days before he came back. How desperate must I have been when I was lying alone on the cold operating table. "Kimura, I'm sorry." Weston suddenly burst into tears. At this moment he finally realized how absurd he had been. Suddenly he received a timed email on his phone. He opened it and saw the content as follows: Weston, by the time you receive this email I'm already gone. I'm sorry that I couldn't be your salvation but became an obstacle between you and Zarya. We were in love for 7 years but I loved you for 10 years. I thought you would gradually forget Zarya but I was wrong. I could never compare to her. As long as she made a phone call, no matter what situation I was facing, you would abandon me without hesitation. Now I really give up. I'm willing to give you back to her and never appear in your life again. No. Kimura, don't go. Weston felt a dense pain in his heart, and this pain was no different from having his flesh cut open bit by bit with a knife. Whenever he thought that he had lost me forever, he felt as if the sky had fallen. The intense regret made him couldn't help but kneel on the ground, hitting the ground hard with his hands. I'm wrong, Kimura, I really know I'm wrong. Weston didn't know how long he had been crying. Suddenly a surge of anger flashed in his eyes and he rushed angrily to Zarya's house. Weston, you're back. I knew you would definitely choose me this time. Zarya happily threw herself at Weston, but in the next second Weston pushed her away violently. Then he slapped her hard. Who told you to add Kimura as a friend and send those things? Weston roared at Zarya. Zarya was slapped, dumbfounded, and covered her face in disbelief. Then an even shriller and harsher roar burst out. You hit me? Weston, no one has ever dared to hit me since I was born. You clearly said that you loved me the most and couldn't lose me at all, but you hit me for that bitch Kimura. Slap, another slap. Weston's face was livid and he said coldly, what do you think you are? I spoiled you just because of our past relationship. Do you think I would get back together with a woman who abandoned me? Don't think I don't know. You left me in the first place because you thought I was poor. Later you were abandoned by your rich second-generation boyfriend abroad and your family went bankrupt. That's when you thought of coming back to me. Zarya's face turned from white to blue and finally flushed red. Weston, what do you think you are? You were the one who took the initiative in the first place. Now that Kimura has found out, you're regretful. Do you deserve it? Weston was speechless for a moment. He couldn't refute Zarya because it was indeed him who had wronged me. Losing me was all his own doing. But he was unwilling. I had loved him so much before. How could we break up just like that? He thought that he must find me and win me back. After arriving in the UK, at first I was a bit unaccustomed, but within half a month I got used to the life here. There was no one I knew here, so naturally I didn't need to socialize. I could immerse myself in art wholeheartedly. My tutor said that I had a high talent for painting and my works even won prizes in international competitions. While I was indulging in art, I unexpectedly saw Weston downstairs in my building. By then 3 months had passed since I left. He looked unkempt with a scruffy beard and there was no trace of his former high spirits. I didn't know how he had found me, but after a moment of silence, I didn't go to see him. But when he couldn't wait for me, he just stood outside my window all the time. The sun rose and the moon set, and he stood there for a whole day and night. In the end, his legs were so weak that they were trembling. I was afraid that it would cause trouble if he died at my doorstep, so I forced myself to suppress my impatience and went downstairs. Weston, what are you doing here? As soon as he saw me, Weston was like a withered rose in the desert getting nourished by water again. His eyes instantly lit up. He rushed up and hugged me tightly with such great strength as if he wanted to merge me into his bones and blood. Kimura, I've finally found you. I'm sorry. Only after you left did I realize how excessive I had been and how much I loved you. I can't accept losing you. As long as you're not by my side, I can't even sleep soundly. You promised that you wouldn't leave me. Please give me one more chance. I won't care about Zarya anymore. I coldly pushed Weston away. There was nothing but disgust and sarcasm in my heart. I don't understand why people always cherish something only after losing it and always like to use the pain after losing to prove how deep their love is. I did promise that I wouldn't leave you, but you also promised that you would forget Zarya. But what did you do? You deceived me again and again for her, trampling my sincerity underfoot. Did you ever consider my feelings at that time? The most useless thing in the world is regret, especially your belated remorse. After saying that, I ignored Weston's pale plea and went straight upstairs. Later, in order to get rid of his entanglement, I moved house. But he always managed to find me like a lingering ghost. He rented a house near my home. Whenever I went out, he would come up to me and then look at me with a hurt look in his eyes. I couldn't bear it anymore and called the police. After that, although he didn't pester me anymore, I knew that he wouldn't give up. 3 years later, on the day I returned to China, sure enough, Weston was already waiting for me at the airport early. The moment I saw him, it was as if I had seen something unlucky. Kimura, you're finally back. Weston tried to hold my hand. But suddenly a tall figure appeared in front of him, blocking his view. I smiled and looked at him. Let me introduce you. This is my new boyfriend, Bruno. Bruno put his arm around my shoulder and raised his eyebrow impatiently at Weston. Are you the ex-husband Kimura mentioned? You? Weston's face instantly turned as pale as paper. He stared fixedly at Bruno's arm around me. This isn't true, Kimura. You deliberately found a man to make me angry, right? You loved me so much. How could you like anyone else? In Weston's uneasy gaze, I coldly shook my head. Weston, it's been 3 years since we separated. Why do you think I still love you? How much clearer do I have to make it? I stopped liking you a long time ago, starting from the day you chose to watch the sunrise with Zarya. Or even earlier, from the first time I found out that you and Zarya still had lingering feelings for each other. Weston swayed unsteadily. He said in a hoarse voice, can't you really give me one more chance? I replied firmly, no. After saying that, I took Bruno's hand and left. I thought that Weston would finally give up this time. But unexpectedly, in order to beg for my forgiveness, he played the words, Kimura, I'm wrong. Please forgive me, in a loop on the building in the city center. The words were twice as big as the ones he had written for Zarya before. I don't know how much money he spent. For a while, everyone in the city knew that Weston had bowed his head for love, and people who didn't know the truth were still discussing that I should forgive him. Bruno was so angry that he gritted his teeth, but I calmed him down. Just leave it to me to handle it. I went to see Weston. Weston, the reason why you keep pestering me is that you think I still love you, right? Weston's eyes were red, and he said in a hoarse voice, isn't it so? You loved me so much that everyone knew it. I don't believe you can just stop loving me like that. I chuckled softly. Then do you know why I fell in love with you in the first place? Because I had been alone for a long time, and no one had ever said that they would stay with me forever. You were the first one to say that, so I believed you. But actually, that person didn't have to be you. It could be anyone. In other words, whoever can accompany me in a way that suits me, I can fall in love with. You were never the special one. After hearing this, Weston's pupils suddenly shrank, as if the belief he had held on to for a long time had collapsed. I continued, I just hadn't been loved before, so I got trapped in the cage in the name of love and wrongly gave my heart to you. Fortunately, now I've figured it out. Weston, you can believe that I really don't love you anymore. After saying that, regardless of how Weston reacted, I turned around and left. Later, I never saw Weston again. The next time I heard news about him was on the news. He suffered from severe depression, locked himself in his room all day long and didn't go out. When others found him, they discovered that he had actually swallowed as many as hundreds of silver needles alive. Netizens were shocked at how cruel he was to himself and couldn't help but dig deeper into his past. Then the netizens found out the story between Weston and Zarya, and then they completely became the rats crossing the street that everyone shouted at. Zarya was cyberbullied so much that she lost her job and had to hide abroad again to seek development. But she couldn't find a job at all, and no one was willing to be with her. She could only be forced to wander on the streets and live with beggars. As for Weston, although he narrowly survived, he became a vegetative state and could only spend the rest of his life in bed. As for me, I snuggled in Bruno's arms, thinking about my next piece of work. I want to thank myself, thank Kimura at the age of 26, for finally breaking through the cage in the name of love. and started living the life I really wanted. The end.